At least 16 trucks have been set alight in the past 3 days in KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga and Limpopo. No arrests have been made as suspicion mounts that these are coordinated attacks on the freight sector. Makone Maja is with the Center for Risk Analysis. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. At this stage, at least, there seems to be more questions than answers. What has been your analysis of what is taking place in South Africa?
Hello, Dudu. Thank you very much for having me on your program. Our analysis so far has really been concentrated at observing trends in truck attacks in the country over the past 3 years. You will know that this is not a first occurrence in a country where the logistical value chain has been under attack in one way or another, particularly in this instance as it relates to truck attacks. This has happened before, particularly if you look at 2019. It was reported that around about 60 trucks were set alight, and that report was coming out in the month of June already. You look back at 2020, where a similar attack was also perpetuated against trucks and truck drivers, and I believe the reports there were something like around 84 trucks were torched between April and November. So us as a risk analysis firm are looking into trends where these sort of events originate from, the role of the state in helping to curb and really bring this sort of violence to an end, as well as how it affects the economy. Business confidence has just recently been reported as being dropping. And so we're looking at all those various metrics and how they at large affect the country.
Are you finding a common thread in terms of these outbreaks? Like you mentioned, this is not the first time, but when they do happen, is there a common thread across provinces?
So far, there seems to be, especially as it relates to the first two incidents of 2019 and 2020. As far as the ones that have just arisen over the week in 2023, we're still waiting for the police to really speak to the motives of these events. As in terms of 2020 and 2019, those were said to have been grievances by truck drivers with who were disgruntled with the employment of foreign nationals or illegal immigrants into the position of truck drivers, and so they were torching those trucks in protest of that. As it relates to 2023, we're really looking at what occurred in terms of state response. There's always questions around the state security cluster and whether its apparatus stretches far enough in terms of, one, gathering security and intelligence to preempt these events from taking place, but secondly, whether law enforcement subsequent to the gathering of said intelligence actually acts on those events in a meaningful way. So far, we compare back to 2020, you will recall that similarly, if not identically, the president was quick to amalgamate a group of various ministers with different departments in an interministerial committee. And that committee was said to, one, deliberate on how to best form coherence between the departments so that these events do not reoccur. And so I think ours is to really look at that interministerial committee of 2020 and to see whether or not it has achieved its goals of, one, monitoring and keeping surveillance of these events so they are preempted from occurring again, but two, that there be continuous engagement across these various departments in order to, again, bring these events to the law.
I think, too, my understanding, if memory serves correctly, we were speaking to Mary Padi, and she mentioned that that particular committee has not sat. And so what is it that you have observed in terms of the work that they have been doing?
So I think one thing we can observe from the formation of these committees is they are meant to bring together members of the state with goals or objectives that overlap, right? So in terms of the 2020 Interministerial Committee, it was formed by 12 different departments, and on those was the Minister of Police, who was the same Minister of Police we have today, the Minister of Labor then as well, still in the position that he is in today, as well as the Minister of State Security, just to name a few. I believe the Minister of Home Affairs and the Department of Home Affairs and Employment and Labour were also part of that committee. But just looking at what has been done, or whether or not they have been able to really carry out their goals and objectives, we see from continued violence, continued torching of trucks, that there seems to be a lack of cohesion in the ability of the state security cluster to clamper down on violence across the country. And so you not only see that failure in the state cluster as well, but you also see it in the committees with overlapping roles and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. And then when we take a look at the role players, you mentioned the state, you mentioned these interministerial committees, but some of the grievances that have been brought up by certain sectors of the population is not just an issue of people who are not necessarily from South Africa being hired, but the issue of companies that continue to engage in this practice. Are we looking at that, and what is being done on that front, if anything at all?
Definitely. I think this would be within the role of the Minister or the Department of Employment and Labour, together with the Minister of Home Affairs. And I believe it was stated back in 2020 that they would have to look back at laws and regulations and see how to best promulgate rules that would stop businesses from engaging in those illegal practices. So far, there seems to have not been really any reports coming out of Employment and Labour to indicate whether there has been any progress made in that regard. So it seems those grievances of 2020 and 2019 continue to persist today.
How then do we understand that against hearing from some leaders in society who say, well, this is economic sabotage, etc., and acknowledge the impact on the economy, but the mechanisms that have been put in place have not even kicked off?
That's exactly right. This rhetoric of economic sabotage is the exact rhetoric we heard coming out of government in 2019 and 2020, again, when similar events, even at a broader scale, a larger scale, were carried out. So there seems to be a lot of maybe lip service paid to the issue of protecting and securing the logistics and freight industry in South Africa. But as far as actions or really tangible conduct by the state to protect the value chain, just does not seem to be following the talk.
Makone Maja is with the Center for Risk Analysis. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.